And I have a quote here. I can't remember where I got it from, but it says, during my tenure, I helped evolve brand positioning, market messaging, visual assets, language, user experience, user interface across the company and product, including all marketing channels, all of which was based on a sound foundation of branding guided by global consumer market research and A/B testing.
Yep.
That's a mouthful. I kind of want to go through that almost not like we're going to unpack that sentence and kind of see how everything kind of threads into through the brand and everything. But you mentioned Leslie Kilgore. And from my understanding, so Netflix has always been data driven, but she really helped level up on the qualitative side, right?
Yeah. Well, everything was, so we had research, consumer research in our marketing department. They served the entire company, but the actual research team sat under marketing. And that was purely because Leslie Kilgore, her background was that she was at Amazon prior to Netflix, and then before that, P&G. So she cut her teeth on a company that lives and dies by qualitative and quantitative data, and so she understood the value of having that in house and being able to tap into that. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
That's a good. My question with qualitative data, because obviously, especially with a company like Netflix, I know when you're there 300,000, but when you're filtering through, when you're getting all this qualitative data, and how do you filter through what to apply and what not to?
Well, I mean, the important thing to do with qualitative research is to listen to what people are intending to say, and you do that by having moderators that get people to ladder. It's called laddering. And so a respondent answers a question, they ask another question to get deeper behind the answer. So we ultimately get to the emotional reason why they're giving that answer. And so it's a matter of, if someone says, "Oh, I don't like this." Well, why don't you like this? Because I don't like blue. It's not, your takeaway isn't, "Oh, no blue." It's like, well, why don't you like blue? Blue is kind of mellow. Why is that bad? Because I need things to be more action oriented when it comes to this brand. And so it's like, okay, so they want a sense of liveliness is the takeaway, not no blue, right? So it's just a matter of listening and asking the right questions and having great moderators who can get the respondents to ladder up.
Do you think brands today are missing qualitative? Because it's so much easier to get quant data versus qualitative data. Do you think it's something that brands are lacking on this right now?
I think so. Yeah, I think. Well, there's a couple of things that they're either not able to do qual or they don't value it, or the other thing is that companies run into is they seek to use qual and quant, even quant, as validators. In other words, they've got a hypothesis, they want to go out and prove it, and so they write questions that get them the answers that they want, as opposed to seeking to understand, which is really what qualitative. And the other thing is qualitative is directional feedback, right? It's not it's not intended to be we'll do X because our focus group says Y. It's directional. You get an idea, and then you go out and you do A/B tests if you can do that.
And And I've heard you say too that people often confuse research and testing. And I want to see, and I'm going to kind of throw my understanding of it, which is probably wrong. Somebody gets you to correct me after, but from my understanding, so your research is kind of what comes before the testing. So you have a hypothesis, you have to do the research to verify your hypothesis to why you believe that. You can't just be throwing hypothesis out for no reason. And then you test based off of that research and the hypothesis to see if it carries through to your brand.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So
Perfect.
I'll give you an example. At Netflix, what we do is we take a look at the non-member, what we call the non-member landing page, which is the page you saw before you signed in or before you signed up. And we had one that was, we always had, obviously had one working and it was going, but we'd take these big swings every once in a while and be like, should it all be about testimonials? Should it all be about content? Should it all be about access? And so we have these big themes and we would create comps based on that. And we put that in front of people and talk to them about it. And what that allowed us to do is go, okay, this concept has something where we need to make modifications. This one's good to go. This one's DOA. We need to get rid of it, not waste any test cell volume on it. Then we take the ones that made it out of there, and we would A/B test them. So we'd have our control, which would have the bulk of the traffic because we didn't want to impede, subscriber growth. But then we carve out enough traffic for each of the test cells to find out if any of those other ones did better than control. And once we got to statistical significance and we had a high degree of confidence of it, then we could say control wins, this one wins, whatever.
How do you balance? Because I hear you speak on that. That's a very thorough process. How do you balance wanting to be thorough and make sure you've researched and tested everything properly, but also working for a startup and understanding that your advantage is the ability to move quickly? How do you balance the time to be thorough, but also wanting to be fast?
Well, Yeah, I will say that at Netflix, when I first started there, we had three people. They were supposed to be doing like website analysis, but they ended up being a research department. Um, two quants, one qual, and we would do guerrilla type qual stuff. We had an agreement with Best Buy in 2001 where they were selling our free trial, and they were kind enough to let us use their back rooms for uh, focus groups, if you will, one-on-one focus group. Um, and we would just drive down the freeway, go to Best Buy, buy a bunch of gift cards, say, we'll buy everything that's in your hands right now if you give us feedback on some stuff. And it's just a matter of taking the time to talk to people as opposed to just hypothesizing and hoping that you're right. Um, but I hear you. I hear what you're saying as far as like a startup. You do have a need to move fast, and things like brand positioning for a startup. You're going to take your best guess first, and you're going to run and gun, and then once you get to product market fit, then you can do kind of step back, and that's what we did at Netflix. We had a brand promise when I first got there that was just sort of like whatever, and then we did research once we got to a certain level with consumers at large, and it changed quite a bit, and it was very powerful.
And I do want to talk about the brand, but with the Best Buy deal, I'm curious, was that primarily all Best Buys kind of within your area?
No, it was a nationwide deal. But we did with regard to research, we did just use, it was basically the idea that we could pop in and do research really quickly, and see if what we were trying to communicate came across.
And so, kind of with that in mind, because that's obviously a very narrow area of research. How do you know the feedback you're getting from people within a Best Buy in your area is going to apply to someone on the opposite coast in New York, for example? How do you know if it's going to resonate the same way?
Well, I mean, the people, like, we wouldn't approach people who were in the washing machine section. We would approach people in the DVD section. They're buying DVDs, and we get a sense for like how they thought about renting DVDs versus buying DVDs and that sort of thing. And chances are, if you are buying DVDs, you rent DVDs, and if you rent DVDs, you're going to be able to give us a perspective on our messaging, and our visuals to see if we've actually accomplished our goals. So we had a pretty high degree of confidence that the feedback was universal.
And you mentioned how all the research was done in house. How much of an advantage was that to Netflix and to your team as opposed to having to work with someone outside the company?
Oh, it was tremendous. Like, because it gave us efficiency. We were able to learn quicker. And don't get me wrong, we used outside resources. Our research team, if we went and did one-on-ones or triads or whatever in like Salt Lake City, we would work with a research facility there, and our team would coordinate it. But the other thing is that once you start going, you start to build up this muscle memory, and so the internal team understood what the strategy of the company was. They understood what the goals of the company was. They understood what we were trying to get at when we went into do research. And so by having them have that sort of institutional knowledge, that led to a lot more efficiency with regards to being able to get to those insights that we needed to get to.
And then how do you kind of mentioned this earlier, how do you ensure when you're trying to research and verify your hypothesis that you're not making sure all the answers kind of give into what you want? Because as you build that muscle memory, you know where the company's going, you know what you're trying to find. How do you ensure that you're not trying to drive the answers in a certain direction?
Again, it comes down to moderators and having excellent moderators, and also having clarity around what you're trying to learn. And what you're trying to learn is not, are we right about this? It's trying to learn, how do people feel about this? How do people think about this? And if it does align with what we're doing, then great. we're in. That's great. But if not, then we need to know that, so that we can change our messaging or change whatever we need to change to be more effective.
And so with being so into numbers, is there ever a point where it's too far? Like where you're too into numbers? Like for example, I read this in a book and I have it written down here. I'm going to kind of just try and summarize it, but there was a study done with horse bettors. And when they were given 5 pieces of data on betting on the horses, they were 17% right. When they were given 10 pieces, they were still 17% right. When they were given 15, still 17, 30, they were something like that. Those numbers, the numbers kept incrementally increasing, but the percentage that they were right never changed. So is there a point where you're just getting too much data in to influence your decision making, or is there's no such thing as too much data?
I don't know if it's too much data. Maybe it's more like analysis paralysis, where you're just you're too overwhelmed with the data that you have because you haven't really narrowly defined what you're trying to figure out. I think that can happen a lot where you're just not sure or you're not confident enough to make a call, and that's a problem because you do have to make a call at some point, and there's going to be upsides and downsides to that call. But you just have to make that call at some point. But it is possible to get frozen by data. Absolutely. And to your point, like more data isn't necessarily better data, better for the situation.
And as someone who works in marketing, where do you land, especially right now? I feel like this is an important conversation. Where do you land on with data collection? Because we're seeing this in the news more often with Apple, Google's eliminating third party cookies. What is your kind of stance on consumer data privacy in terms of data collection?
Yeah, that's it's weird because part of me is like, well, the more data we have, the better we're able to target and show relevant ads and relevant messages. Unfortunately, that doesn't just apply to products and services, but it applies to propaganda and false information and that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see where this lands. But I'm of two minds on it because personally I'm not a fan of having disinformation being able to be sent out there. But but at the same time, if you ever run a campaign on Facebook, the targeting that you're able to do on there is insane in a good way because you're in front of people that have shown the interest uh, in what you are putting out there.